The midday sun, filtered through the restaurant's expansive windows, cast a honeyed glow over the pristine white tablecloths. Jinxie smoothed a non-existent crease from her scarlet dress, the color a stark contrast to the cool, composed exterior she presented. "I'd like to order 1 salad, 3 steaks, 5 cups of iced lemon tea, and 7 macarons as deserved," she announced, her voice crisp and clear, each number enunciated with deliberate precision. 1. 3. 5. 7. The odd numbers hung in the air, a subtle challenge she couldn't quite articulate, even to herself. It was a childish impulse, this need for asymmetry, a quiet rebellion against the predictable, the even, the mundane. Gushi Qing, across the table, raised a brow, a flicker of amusement in his dark eyes. He knew her well enough by now to recognize the telltale signs of her restless spirit. Nangong Liuli, seated beside him, maintained a serene smile, but Jinxie caught the tightening of her grip on her water glass, a momentary betrayal of the flawless facade. The waiter, unfazed by the peculiar order, scribbled on his notepad and retreated. Jinxie's gaze followed him, a restless energy humming beneath her skin. The restaurant, with its muted chatter and the clinking of silverware, felt too confined, a gilded cage for her ambitions. Why 3 steaks? She wasn't even hungry. The excess felt like a statement, a display of something she couldn't name. Maybe it was a subconscious mirroring of the tangled web they were all caught in, a triangle of unspoken desires and resentments. She shot a glance at Anan, perched elegantly at the corner of the table, sipping her wine with a detached air. Anan, the enigma, always observing, never revealing. Jinxie envied her composure, the way she seemed to float above the simmering tensions, untouched by the currents of emotion swirling around them. The arrival of their order interrupted Jinxie's spiraling thoughts. 3 perfectly seared steaks, their aroma a tantalizing blend of char and richness, filled the air. 5 glasses of iced lemon tea, the condensation clinging to the frosted surfaces, stood sentinel around the centerpiece of one lone salad. And finally, 7 macarons, jewel-toned and delicate, arranged with artistic precision on a porcelain plate. The sight of the food, so meticulously ordered and presented, brought a strange sense of satisfaction to Jinxie. It was an illusion of control in a world where she felt increasingly powerless, caught in a game whose rules she hadn't written. Gushi Qing cut into his steak, the knife slicing through the tender meat with a quiet hiss. He chewed slowly, his gaze distant, as if lost in thought. Nangong Liuli, ever graceful, picked at her salad, her movements precise and economical. The air crackled with unspoken words, the silence heavy with meaning. Jinxie watched them, her heart a tight knot in her chest. This charade, this polite dance of civility, was suffocating her. She wanted to shatter the fragile peace, to tear away the masks and expose the raw emotions simmering beneath. "You can have mine, Chi-chan," Jinxie offered, pushing her plate towards Gushi Qing. Her voice was soft, almost a murmur, but the gesture was loaded with meaning. It was a public declaration, a staking of her claim, a challenge thrown down in the guise of generosity. The pet name, a childhood relic resurrected, hung in the air, a sharp contrast to the formality of their surroundings. Gushi Qing paused, his fork suspended midair. He looked at Jinxie, his eyes unreadable. Then, he slowly shook his head. "I'm fine, thank you." The rejection, though gentle, felt like a slap. Jinxie's breath hitched. She forced a smile, a brittle, artificial curve of her lips. "Are you sure?" "I'm not very hungry." The lie was transparent, but she pressed on, driven by a force she didn't fully understand. Nangong Liuli cleared her throat, the sound a delicate counterpoint to the sudden tension. "Perhaps you should try the macarons, Jinxie. They look delicious." Her voice was smooth as silk, but Jinxie heard the subtle edge beneath the pleasantries. The implication was clear: stop pushing, back down. Jinxie's fingers tightened around her napkin. She wanted to scream, to throw the macarons across the room, to disrupt the carefully constructed tableau they had created. But instead, she picked up a mint green macaron and took a delicate bite. The sweetness was cloying, a sickly contrast to the bitterness churning inside her. She forced herself to swallow, the act of physical manifestation of the emotions she was struggling to suppress. This silent battle, waged with smiles and polite gestures, was exhausting. Anan, throughout this exchange, remained silent, her gaze sweeping over the scene with an unsettling intensity. Her detachment was unnerving, as if she were watching a play unfold, analyzing the motives and desires of the actors on stage. Jinxie wondered what Anan saw, what conclusions she drew from their carefully orchestrated performance. Did she see the desperation behind Jinxie's bravado? The hurt in Nangong Lioli's carefully composed smile? The conflict raging within Gushi Qing? As the lunch dragged on, the tension thickened, palpable and suffocating. Jinxie felt as if she were trapped in a pressure cooker, the heat of her emotions building, threatening to explode. She excused herself abruptly, the need for escape overwhelming her. She stumbled out of the restaurant, the bright sunlight assaulting her eyes. The cool air on her skin was a welcome relief, a temporary reprieve from the stifling atmosphere inside. She walked aimlessly, her mind racing, the events of the lunch replaying in her head like a broken record. She needed to make a decision, to break free from this suffocating triangle. As she walked, a new resolve hardened within her, a clarity emerging from the chaos. She wouldn't continue this charade. She would choose her own path, even if it meant walking away from everything she thought she wanted. The midday sun cast a harsh glare on the polished chrome of the restaurant's revolving door, reflecting a distorted image of Jinxie back at herself. She watched Gushi Qing emerge, his tall frame briefly eclipsing the light. A flicker of annoyance, quickly suppressed, crossed her face. He hadn't even bothered to hold the door for her. Such a small gesture, yet its absence felt like a deliberate slight. He's doing it on purpose, she thought, the familiar knot of resentment tightening in her stomach. Trying to show me who's in control. He paused, adjusting the collar of his crisp white shirt, a gesture Jinxie had always found inexplicably attractive. It spoke of a casual elegance, an effortless confidence that grated on her now. He turned towards her, a faint question in his dark eyes. "Ready?" he asked, his voice smooth and even, betraying none of the tension simmering beneath the surface. "Ready for what?" Jinxie's voice was sharper than intended. The question hung in the air, laced with an unspoken accusation. As if he doesn't know. Inside, a whirlwind of emotions, frustration, jealousy, a desperate longing for something she couldn't quite define threatened to overwhelm her. She forced herself to take a deep breath, the crisp city air doing little to cool the fire in her veins. Gushi Qing's brow furrowed slightly. "To leave. Unless you prefer to stand here all afternoon." His words, seemingly innocuous, pricked at her like needles. He enjoys this, she thought, this little game of cat and mouse. He knew exactly what was bothering her, and yet he chose to feign ignorance. The casual indifference in his demeanor was more infuriating than outright hostility. "You already have Nanguli," Jinxie blurted out, the words escaping before she could stop them. "Why did you come out and follow me? Don't be so willful." The silence that followed was heavy, broken only by the distant drone of traffic. Gushi Qing's expression remained unreadable, a mask she had grown increasingly frustrated with trying to decipher. He looked away, his gaze drifting towards the street, as if searching for an escape route in the flow of passing cars. Jinxie watched him, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. She had laid her cards on the table, raw and exposed. Now, she waited for his response, a single word, a gesture, anything that would offer a glimpse into the labyrinth of his thoughts. He finally turned back to her, his eyes now holding a flicker of something she couldn't quite place. Was it annoyance? Resignation? Or something else entirely? Jinxie, he began, his voice low and controlled, I don't understand what you're talking about. His denial was like a slap in the face. He thinks I'm stupid, she thought, the anger rising in her chest like a tidal wave. Don't play dumb, Gushi Ching. You and Nandong Liuli stayed together. I saw you. The words were clipped, each syllable imbued with the bitter taste of betrayal. He took a step closer, his proximity suddenly overwhelming. The faint scent of his cologne, a familiar mix of sandalwood and citrus, filled her senses, triggering a confusing mix of attraction and resentment. Jinxie, he repeated, his voice softer now, we had a business meeting. That's all. His explanation, so simple and plausible, felt like a carefully constructed lie. The memory of the intimate way Nandong Yuli had touched his arm, the lingering look in her eyes, flashed through Jinxie's mind. A business meeting? Does he really expect me to believe that? And Fu Boyle? Jinxie challenged, the name a bitter pill on her tongue. Was that a business meeting too? Gushi Ching flinched, the mask of composure finally cracking. The flicker of surprise in his eyes confirmed her suspicions. He didn't expect me to bring her up. Jinxie felt a surge of triumph, a small victory in this agonizing battle for his attention. He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture of frustration Jinxie had come to recognize. Jinxie, he sighed, his voice laced with weariness, my relationships are complicated. It's not as simple as you think. Complicated? Jinxie echoed, the word dripping with sarcasm. Is that your excuse for playing with people's feelings? She felt a sudden urge to turn and walk away, to escape the suffocating weight of his presence, but her feet remained rooted to the spot. She needed answers, even if they were ones she didn't want to hear. He remained silent for a long moment, his gaze fixed on some distant point beyond her shoulder. The silence stretched, taut and heavy with unspoken words. Jinxie watched him, her heart a tangled mess of hope and despair. She wanted him to deny everything, to tell her she was wrong, that she was the only one who mattered. But the words wouldn't come. Finally, he turned to her, his expression a mixture of resignation and something akin to regret. Jinxie, he said, his voice barely above a whisper, I can't give you what you want. The words hung in the air, sharp and cold, shattering the fragile remnants of her hope. A wave of nausea washed over her, leaving her feeling weak and empty. She had known, deep down, that this was the answer, but hearing him say it aloud was like a physical blow. The city noises, the distant car horns and the chatter of passers-by, faded into a dull roar. The world around her seemed to blur, the vibrant colors of the cityscape draining away, leaving only a stark, colorless landscape. She wanted to scream, to lash out, to demand an explanation, but the words caught in her throat, choked by the rising tide of despair. She took a step back, putting some distance between them. The small space felt like a chasm, a vast and unbridgeable gulf separating them. He's made his choice, she thought, the realization sinking in with a chilling finality. And it's not me. I understand, she said, her voice hollow and devoid of emotion. She turned and walked away, the click of her heels on the pavement echoing the emptiness in her heart. The clinking of silverware against porcelain, the murmur of conversations weaving through the air, the heady aroma of Sichuan peppercorns, it all faded into the background as Jinxie stared across the table at Gushi Ching. He was laughing, a low rumble in his chest that resonated with something deep within her, a chord struck that only she seemed to hear. Nangong Liuli sat beside him, her perfectly manicured hand resting lightly on his forearm, a possessive gesture that sent a prickle of annoyance down Jinxie's spine. He doesn't belong to you, she thought, the words a silent, venomous whisper in her mind. Not anymore. She forced a smile, lifting her glass of wine in a toast. Congratulations on the successful launch, Gushi Qing. You were brilliant, as always. Her voice was smooth, controlled, betraying none of the turbulent emotions churning beneath the surface. He met her gaze, a flicker of something unreadable in his dark eyes. Thank you, Jinxie. Your contribution was invaluable. His words were polite, professional, a wall carefully erected between them. A wall she was determined to tear down. Oh, it was nothing, she demurred, her smile widening fractionally. Just doing my job. But the job wasn't what she craved. It was him. The memory of their time together abroad, the stolen moments of intimacy, the shared laughter and whispered secrets, they were a constant, intoxicating presence in her mind, fueling her relentless pursuit. Nangong Lioli cleared her throat, a subtle interruption that grated on Jinxie's nerves. Indeed, Jinxie's work ethic is truly admirable, she said, her voice laced with a sweetness that Jinxie recognized as pure venom. She's completely dedicated to the company, aren't you, dear? Jinxie's fingers tightened around her wine glass. Dedicated to you, you mean? Of course, she replied, her voice even. Wouldn't want to disappoint Gushi Qing. She directed her gaze at him, a silent challenge in her eyes. The tension at the table was palpable, a thick, suffocating blanket. Anan, who had been observing the exchange with a detached amusement, finally spoke. Why do I feel that you've changed a lot after coming back from abroad, Jinxie? Her question, seemingly casual, hung in the air, sharp and pointed. Jinxie's breath hitched. Anan's words, though seemingly innocuous, struck a nerve. Had she changed? Undeniably. The time abroad had stripped away a layer of naivete, replacing it with a steely determination, a single-minded focus on reclaiming what she believed was hers. Perhaps travel broadens the mind, Jinxie replied, her smile carefully crafted. Inside, however, a storm was brewing. Anan's observation, so astute, so piercing, left her feeling exposed, vulnerable. Later, as the night wore on, the group dispersed. Anan found herself driving a slightly inebriated Nangong Lioli home. The city lights blurred past the car window, casting a kaleidoscopic glow on Lioli's tear-streaked face. He doesn't see me anymore, Lioli slurred, her voice thick with unshed tears. Only her. Anan remained silent, her hands steady on the steering wheel. She felt a pang of sympathy for Lioli, but it was quickly overshadowed by a sense of weary understanding. She had seen this pattern before, the destructive dance of obsession and unrequited love. It's my honor to serve you. It's really a pleasure, Anan said, her voice calm and soothing. She pulled up to Lioli's apartment building, the sleek lines of the car reflecting the cold, indifferent glow of the streetlights. As Lioli stumbled out of the car, Anan watched her go, a sense of foreboding settling over her. Alone in the car, Anan's thoughts drifted back to Jinxie. The fierce glint in her eyes, the unwavering determination in her voice, it was both admirable and unsettling. She's playing a dangerous game, Anan thought, the realization hitting her with the force of a physical blow. And I'm not sure she understands the stakes. Meanwhile, Jinxie stood on the bustling street, the city lights a dizzying blur around her. She hailed a cab, the cool night air a welcome contrast to the stifling atmosphere of the restaurant. As the cab weaved through the city streets, Jinxie's thoughts raced. She replayed the evening's events in her mind, dissecting every word, every glance, every nuance of interaction. Gushi Qing's polite detachment, Nangong Lioli's veiled hostility, Anan's perceptive observation, they all fueled the fire burning within her. I will make such fall in love with me again, she whispered, the words a fierce mantra against the backdrop of the city's relentless hum. I definitely will. Her voice was low, determined, a promise made not only to herself but to the ghosts of their shared past. The memory of their time together, the stolen moments of intimacy, the shared laughter and whispered secrets, they were a constant, intoxicating presence in her mind, fueling her relentless pursuit. She knew the path ahead would be fraught with challenges, with heartache and uncertainty. But she was prepared to fight, to claw her way back into his heart, no matter the cost. The city lights, blurring past the cab window, seemed to echo her resolve, a shimmering reflection of the burning ambition that consumed her. She would win him back. She had to. The muted hum of the air conditioning unit was the only sound in Gushi Qing's office, a stark contrast to the tempest brewing within its walls. Nangong Liuli stood rigidly, the crisp lines of her suit mirroring the controlled anger she felt. Across the expansive mahogany desk, Gushi Qing sat, his face an impassive mask. He tapped a pen against a stack of papers, the rhythmic sound a counterpoint to the silent accusations hanging in the air. Liuli watched the pen, its movement a physical manifestation of her own churning thoughts. He avoids my eyes. He knows. The realization was a bitter pill. I think I should resign now. The words hung in the air, sharp and brittle. Liuli hadn't planned to say them, not yet. But the suffocating tension, the weight of unspoken accusations, the subtle shift in his demeanor, it all pushed her over the precipice. Gushi Qing's hand stilled, the pen hovering mid-tap. He finally looked up, his gaze meeting hers with a flicker of something she couldn't quite decipher. Regret? Relief? Or is it indifference? The thought pricked at her, a sharp shard of ice lodging in her chest. Resign? He echoed, his voice carefully neutral. Why? Liuli's fingers tightened around the strap of her handbag. Why? Because of you. Because of her. The words remained unspoken, a venomous whisper in the confines of her mind. Instead, she forced a cool smile, a facade as brittle as thin ice. Personal reasons, she replied, her voice betraying none of the turmoil within. He leaned back in his chair, the leather creaking softly. The silence stretched, each tick of the clock amplifying the tension. Liuli could practically feel the walls closing in on her. He doesn't even try to stop me. The realization was a blow, a confirmation of her deepest fears. Had their years of shared history, of collaborative success, meant so little? Is that true? Director Nangong really printed her resignation letter? Jinxi's voice, laced with mock surprise, sliced through the strained silence. She stood at the doorway, a triumphant smirk playing on her lips, her eyes glittering with malicious glee. Liuli fought the urge to recoil, to shield herself from the venom dripping from every word. She knew. She planned this. Gushi Qing looked from Jinxi to Liuli, his expression unreadable. Liuli held his gaze, a silent challenge. Say something. Defend me. But his silence was a deafening answer. The small flicker of hope that had stubbornly clung to her heart finally extinguished itself. Jinxi sauntered into the room, her movements deliberately provocative. She leaned against Gushi Qing's desk, her fingers tracing the edge of a framed photograph. Liuli recognized it instantly, a picture of them, Gushi Qing and herself, taken at a design conference years ago. A wave of nausea washed over her. This is a performance, a deliberate humiliation. It's a shame, Jinxi continued, her voice dripping with false sympathy. Director Nangong is such a talented designer. It'll be difficult to replace her. The emphasis on talented hung in the air, heavy with insinuation. Liuli felt a cold rage begin to simmer beneath her forced composure. She's twisting the knife, enjoying my pain. The accusations, the whispers, the subtle sabotage, it all culminated in this moment, this calculated display of power. Perhaps, Liuli finally said, her voice dangerously calm. But some things are more important than talent. She turned her gaze to Gushi Qing, her eyes burning with unshed tears. Like integrity. Like loyalty. He shifted uncomfortably under her gaze, his hand reaching up to loosen his tie. The gesture, small and almost involuntary, spoke volumes. He knew. He knew about Jinxie's machinations, about the stolen designs, the manipulated data, the carefully crafted web of lies. And he had chosen to remain silent. It was Nangong who appropriated my designs. But now I'm blamed instead. Jinxie's words, sharp and accusatory, shattered the fragile truce. The lie, blatant and audacious, hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Liuli felt a surge of anger so intense it threatened to consume her. She wanted to scream, to lash out, to tear down the carefully constructed facade of innocence Jinxie wore like a mask. But something held her back. A weary resignation, a deep-seated understanding that any protest would be futile. She looked at Gushi Qing one last time, searching his face for a flicker of understanding, a spark of the connection they once shared. But his eyes were averted, his gaze fixed on the papers on his desk. The message was clear. He had made his choice. I have nothing more to say, Liuli said, her voice hollow. She placed her resignation letter on his desk, the crisp white paper a stark contrast to the dark wood. It felt like a final severance, a symbolic cutting of ties. Without another word, she turned and walked out of the office, the click of her heels against the polished floor echoing in the silence. The hum of the air conditioning unit seemed to grow louder, filling the void left by her departure. As the door clicked shut behind her, Liuli felt a strange sense of relief. The weight of unspoken words, of suppressed emotions, finally lifted. It was over. And in its ending, she found a strange, unexpected freedom. The city lights blurred through the car window as she drove away, each streetlight a receding marker of a life she was leaving behind. The pain was still there, a dull ache in her chest. But beneath the pain, a new resolve began to take root. She would rebuild. She would start again. And this time, she would do it on her own terms. The car's interior, a plush, charcoal gray, swallowed the city lights filtering through the tinted windows. Ainen gripped the steering wheel, the leather cool beneath her fingers, a stark contrast to the burning anxiety churning in her stomach. 3 phone calls. 3 missed calls from Gushi Qing. Odd. He was never one to chase. He usually let things drift, like leaves on a slow-moving stream. She tapped the screen, illuminating his name again. 3 missed calls. A prickle of unease crawled up her spine. What could be so urgent? Her phone buzzed, his name flashing across the screen. This time, she answered. Gushi. Ainen, his voice, normally smooth as aged whiskey, was rough, frayed at the edges. Can we meet? It's important. The tightness in her chest constricted. He wouldn't say what was wrong. He never did. He built walls around himself, brick by careful brick, until no one could truly see in. Ainen had tried. Years she'd known him, years she'd danced around the periphery of his life, but the core of him, the shadowed, hidden parts, remained elusive. Of course. Where are you? An hour later, she found him at their usual spot, a quiet, dimly lit bar tucked away on a side street. He was nursing a drink, his gaze fixed on the amber liquid swirling in the glass. He looked smaller, somehow. Defeated. He hadn't even noticed her approach. Gushi. He flinched, as if startled out of a deep sleep. His eyes, usually sharp and calculating, were clouded with a dull ache. Ainen. You came. It wasn't a statement, but a plea. She slid into the booth opposite him, the worn leather creaking softly beneath her. What is it? What's wrong? He took a long swallow of his drink, the ice clinking against the glass. I'm afraid I have a serious illness. I'm here to see you for the last time. The words hung in the air, thick and suffocating. Ainan's breath hitched. Illness? Last time. This wasn't him. This wasn't the gushy Ching she knew. What are you talking about? He avoided her gaze, staring at the melting ice. It's complicated. I just wanted to say goodbye. A wave of nausea washed over her. This was a performance. A dramatic, self-pitying performance. She knew it. But why? What was he trying to achieve? Gushy, look at me. He finally met her eyes, his own filled with a raw, desperate vulnerability that was both unsettling and strangely compelling. Don't pity me, Ainan. Pity? No, it wasn't pity she felt. It was confusion, frustration, and a simmering anger. I'm not pitying you. I'm trying to understand. What illness? Tell me. He didn't answer. Instead, he reached across the table and took her hand, his touch surprisingly cold. Just remember me, Ainan. That's all I ask. The weight of his words pressed down on her, heavy and suffocating. This wasn't goodbye. It was a cry for help, cloaked in melodrama. But what could she do? How could she break through the walls he had so meticulously constructed? The bar door swung open, a gust of cold night air sweeping in, followed by Jinxie's vibrant, almost aggressive energy. She spotted them instantly, her eyes narrowing slightly as she strode towards their booth. Gushy. Ainan. What a coincidence. Her voice was laced with a saccharine sweetness that Ainan knew was entirely false. Jinxie's arrival shifted the atmosphere, injecting a sharp, unsettling tension into the air. Gushy withdrew his hand from Ainan's, his expression hardening. Jinxie. It was barely a whisper. I was just looking for you, Jinxie said, her gaze fixed on Gushy, ignoring Ainan completely. I have something to tell you. She leaned closer, her perfume, a cloying blend of exotic flowers, filling the air. I like you. Ainan watched the scene unfold, a detached observer in a play she didn't understand. Gushy seemed stunned, his eyes wide with disbelief. Later, Ainan drove, the streetlights blurring into streaks of white and gold. Jinxie sat beside her, a triumphant smirk playing on her lips. Gushy had left with Jinxie, a puppet on a string. Ainan felt a pang of something she couldn't quite name. Was it pity? Concern? Or something else entirely? He's fragile, Ainan finally said, breaking the silence. Jinxie laughed, a sharp, brittle sound. Fragile? Gushy Ching. Don't be ridiculous. He's just playing a game. What kind of game? The kind where he gets what he wants. And right now, he wants me. Ainan pulled up outside Jinxie's apartment building. The silence stretched, thick and heavy. Be careful, Jinxie. Jinxie's smirk widened. Careful? Why? I'm getting exactly what I want. She opened the car door, then paused, turning back to Ainan. By the way, she said, her voice low and conspiratorial, he told me about his illness. Dramatic, isn't he? Men. They always play the victim. Ainan watched as Jinxie disappeared into the building, the heavy door clicking shut behind her. The lie. The manipulation. It was a game, just as Jinxie said. But what were the stakes? The next day, Jinxie cornered Ainan at the office. What do I have to pay for kissing you? Gushy Ching asked, his voice low, almost a growl. Jinxie had recounted the previous night's events with a smug satisfaction that grated on Ainan's nerves. Jinxie had apparently kissed him, a bold, calculated move. I kissed you to let Nangong Lioli see. I was claiming ownership, Jinxie had told him. Ainan felt a surge of anger, a protective instinct rising within her. This wasn't a game. This was a man's life, his vulnerability being exploited for someone else's amusement. She wanted to shake him, to make him see. But she knew it was futile. He was lost in his own performance, his own carefully constructed world of self-deception. The office buzzed with activity, the phones ringing, the keyboards clicking, the murmur of conversations creating a constant, low hum. But Anan felt a strange disconnect, as if she were watching it all unfold from a distance. Jinxie, Gushy, Nangong Lioli, they were all players in a game she didn't understand, a game with rules she couldn't comprehend. And she, Anan, was caught in the crossfire.